excited to welcome all the folks here to chat about building a platform experience that partners and customers love. So this panel is scheduled to run until 3:40 Eastern, and we have some great questions already queued up, but we'll also leave about 10 minutes at the end for audience questions. So if anyone wants to chime in, you can use the Q&A function within Zoom, and we'll get to as many as we can. So without further ado, we should do some intros. So maybe if you can say who you are, where you work, and what you do, and then we can kick off the panel. So Courtney, you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Courtney George. I am currently the head of design for data at Amplitude. Recently started about 3 months ago, where I'm focused, or my team is focused on how do we ingest data, govern it, and send that clean data to different destinations like Amplitude Analytics. Prior to that, I worked at Adobe for a number of years. Almost 8 years as the design manager for the developer ecosystem team there. So focused cross-cloud on how external developers would use our APIs and services to build on top of our technology.
Awesome, thank you for joining. Ashwini, would you like to go?
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Ashwini Sriram. I currently lead a product team at Twilio. And before Twilio, I was at PayPal and Intuit, also building developer infrastructure and developer platforms. Before becoming a product manager, I was an engineer. So that's why I really love working in this space. Yeah, excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And Kirby, would you like to go?
Yeah, my name is Kirby Montgomery, and I'm the vice president of product at a B2B company called C2FO. And so for the last 10 years, I've focused mainly in B2B fintech, and then working with those companies on how to create APIs and SDKs to expand and create an ecosystem. I had a short stint, and I'm a recovering founder. My startup was acquired about 1.5 years ago, and so I'm kind of back in big business and enjoying it.
I like that, recovering founder. Richard, go ahead.
Hi there, my name is Richard Fortune, and I currently lead product for the platform experience here at Xero. Prior to that, well, I've had a long tenure at Xero, but prior to that, I was at Microsoft, and I, for some reason, consider myself platform native in that, like, I've always worked in these big organizations that have kind of had to think bigger. And so I love the bigness of the space, and delighted to be on the panel today because I know everyone else has had some really great experiences as well.
Yeah, we've got lots of good seasoned folks here. Thanks so much. So let's go ahead and kick it off. So our very first question, partner developers can vary from small little agencies building an extension all the way to developer teams from large SaaS companies building complex integrations. When you guys are thinking about the design of developer user experience, what are some of the ways you found to ensure that the experience is consistent and works for the different kinds of personas that might be using your platform? And I see Courtney unmuted. I don't know if that meant you wanted to go, but I'm going to call on you.
That works. Yeah, I think the first thing for us was really creating an understanding, having that deep understanding on what all of the different personas are. It's not just developers that are involved in this ecosystem. There's decision makers, there's marketers. You really have to think about how everybody's going to work together and interact with your platform. And then kind of the second thing is then designing for scale. At Adobe especially, you don't have the luxury of like, well, this is going to be, they're all going to build a plugin for Photoshop, or they're all going to do something with PDF services. There's a wide variety of use cases. So you have to think about, on the UX side, creating that flexible framework where you're really opinionated on information architecture, navigation, and kind of those patterns, but less opinionated on the specific nuances of each step of the workflow.
Yeah, Kirby, it looks like you had a comment.
Yeah, so I want to build on what Courtney said. When Courtney mentioned personas, all of the tools of UX designers should be applied to this customer journey. And so when you're thinking about your platform developer experience or your DX, you should have personas, you should have a journey map, and you should be thinking and working. And one of the funnest things that I've found in this practice, though, is you get to bring in your engineering team, and you get to say, imagine that you were integrating with our API. What would make this delightful and what would frustrate you so? And then when the product manager and the other designers are there to hear some of that, you know, and kind of doing a proxy on that persona, you start to get creative on how might we really make great documentation? How are we going to administer our API keys? And then also, what tools should we build to turn our integrators into super users, like power tools? How do we help them? And so I would just say that never skip in the UX toolkit.
Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump on that as well. I think everyone's touched on the DX side of it, which I love. I love that Courtney brought up the idea of all the consumers of your platform. I think that's a really strong message to get into the public in that I think people get distracted by the fact that they're dealing with developers and they think that, oh, they're a special case and that they're unique. And you're like, no, they're humans with jobs to be done, desires, measures of success, but they're also on a team and you have to kind of figure out that team. And so for me, it's always having a deep understanding of the integration lifecycle, understanding where they're on the journey. And then I think, Kirby, you mentioned laying down uniform infrastructure and then enhancing the common touch points. So like if there's a touch point where these experiences overlap, make that really, really delightful, make them as successful as you can at that point. Yeah, so I'll stop there.
Yeah, so Richard, to that point, as there are other teams on here and they're thinking about what I should create, one of the best things that I have found is to, like all great artists steal. And so me working in B2B fintech, I go to Xero's documentation and I see what they're doing and I say, great, my product may be magic and bespoke, but my APIs should fit mental models of this industry. So you don't need to get fancy on how you name your bank account endpoint or how you describe these things. You go to where people are familiar and you try to borrow that as much as possible. And so you should never start with a blank paper. You should go to the experts.
I also tend to agree with Richard on, developers are humans trying to do jobs at the end of the day. So having a good understanding of the jobs that these people are trying to do and sometimes not slotting them into distinct personas helps. Because, these days a product manager is also a developer in some sense because they're building low code, no code tools. So having a strict, persona in mind called a developer seems to no longer work. So that's been a learning that we found at Twilio as well.
Yeah, we do the same actually at Amplitude, because when somebody's working with data and cleaning that data, they might be a data scientist, they might be a data governor, they might be a product manager that has a little bit of technical, or that's just the job that they need to do to get it done. So, trying to think about it more as functions as opposed to like what their job title might be.
Yeah, we'll probably touch on this in another question, but we're going through that right now. Like after 10 years, we're reevaluating what developer means to us. And one of the points I was going to make was clarify what a developer means or what a partner means, because like our domain is called developer.xero.com, and it kills me today because everyone inside the business still looks at this and goes, "You look after developers," and we're like, "No, we look after everyone who has a platform relationship with us." So yeah, I'll stop there.
Awesome. Any final thoughts on this one?
I have one, sorry if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Something I think about as well is just like you, Kirby, we do a lot of developer experience analysis externally. So we have a community of practice internally that looks at others. And while we do that with the intent of actually really understanding their motivations rather than just kind of borrowing, I'm not saying you do this, Kirby, by the way, but not just borrowing verbatim what others have done, but actually understanding what were the drivers for them to make that decision and do we understand why. So we will look at the likes of businesses that are not like us at all, like Miro, Notion, and these other companies, and kind of, well, their product-led growth, what can we take from their approach? And yeah, I think that's a real key thing to consider, and it sounds like you're doing that already as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the best things I feel like is that when you go to API first companies, that is their only product experience. And so I'm sure every product manager has spent their time in the Stripe portal, but when you make that breath and you go, cool, I'm gonna go look at 10 different developer experiences, that's where, building on your point, Richard, you're starting to get inspiration from everywhere. Like, how are they doing this? How are they solving these? And then letting that be just a framework to then get creative from, because you want to make your own developer experience and you have your own use case.
Awesome, good insights. And I think this next question sort of touches on the multiple personas thing. So how should organizations who engage in go-to-market activities with their tech partners think about the decision to offer one partner portal versus like a developer portal for engineers and a separate portal for go-to-market teams? I think to your points, there's also like product people that are involved in that. So what have you guys seen be successful, or how do you kind of figure out where folks should go to get the information that's relevant to them? Go ahead, Kirby.
Oh, as I say, Richard brought up jobs to be done. I think Courtney had mentioned that as well. And so when you've gone through the exercise that Courtney laid out, where you understand your personas, you know the jobs that they have to create. And so when you think about, say, for example, the Office Xero developer portal, there's a space there for engineers to do integrations, but there's also space there for customer support to do things like reset passwords and things like that. And so when you expand and truly understand all those personas, it starts to define where people do their work, and then how that access should work. And sometimes it makes sense to break it because you don't want a persona in a place where they don't need to be and there's cognitive overload and they can't navigate to get their job done.
Yeah, to add on that, I think this was a pretty common discussion that we had. And I think ultimately, because of the variety of use cases that we had, it was more of a complex task where, like, in some circumstances, it might be the same person and it made sense to blend a partner, go-to-market portal and a developer portal. In some cases, they were very opposite. But I think there's no right answer. It depends on the size of your company and the problems that you're trying to solve. But I think even if they are separate portals, you have to be thinking about what that end-to-end workflow is across the team in order to accomplish creating an integration and putting it on a marketplace or whatever it is, to ensure that there's like a really seamless link between the portals and the different experiences.
Yeah, we had this problem at Xero a couple of years ago. We had to evaluate that exact situation and determine whether or not we did want to separate it. And interestingly enough, the bias at the time was we were aligning towards our org structure, which obviously is a massive no-no. And so that felt intuitive to the people involved. And it was quite a challenge to kind of move for a different direction. But as Courtney's point, it's figuring out your long-term strategy. So for us, we wanted a platform experience that was consistent. And so we ended up building a platform product that internal teams could just plug services into. And that meant we didn't really have to, we kicked the can down the road on addressing the scaling problem. We basically used an internal library for design, single page app model so that people could plug into us. And therefore we bypassed having to make the hard decision because we're not Google. And they do very different things to what we would ever do.
Yeah, I think I have a similar perspective in that one of the things that we've learned over the last few years, both at Twilio and other companies that I've been at, is that having like this separation that, hey, you are a developer and you are a GTM person, those walls are beginning to break down, and having more of like a goal-oriented design where I'm trying to create an invoice for my customer, having those types of jobs have really helped us think about design and the success of that design. So as a person, were you trying to do this job, were you able to accomplish or not? And whatever, interfaces lead that person to successfully accomplish that task, we've gone with that in mind and not try to create like differences between, oh, this is a GTM portal and this is a developer portal.
Yeah, it's interesting. In our world, we talk to a lot of companies that are just building out this sort of like tech partner team, and it's usually in Biz Dev. And we see they're often like really siloed from everybody else. Like they have their own goals and stuff, but they don't have the resources and the access to folks like you guys. So it's an interesting question around like you get into these organizations and there's like teams using totally different products and processes, and nobody really has it standardized. I'm curious if you guys have an opinion on companies that have done that really well, sort of like blending the partner, like go-to-market biz dev experience and the developer experience. And this is a question from me, actually. I'm curious.
So one of the companies that I love that really marries this is Codat.io. And for those of you who don't know, Codat.io kind of wraps accounting systems like Xero and QuickBooks. But the way that they have packaged their enterprise sales process, then all the way through that timed first hello world is very seamless. And some of the tools that they've used to do that are pretty, like, it's just a nice combination. So the first thing is great storytelling. So similar to Twilio, whenever I'm looking at Twilio website, I see storytelling use cases and like real people telling real stories about why I should be inspired to use this product. And as Richard had mentioned, like, developers are humans, they want to be inspired too. And product managers want to be inspired. So when I went through the Kodak process, I felt like I could create so many things with this. But I was very quickly shepherded to then getting a sandbox, getting that sandbox to my dev team, all while having conversations. So there was never artificial barriers put in between me and the next step of the process. And I think that, as I work a lot in B2B and we look at this big system and we're trying to create more ecosystems, you will find terrible decisions that have been made. Passwords on API docs, a mysterious person that can get you an API key, but they have to put in a ticket and the ticket's going to take 2 weeks to process. And these are all things that drive me crazy. And I'm also like, screw that. I don't want to work at this company. Like, I want to work with somebody who wants to give me their product. Like, I will pay them. And so Kodak crushed it. And I'm just going to give a lot of love to them.
That's awesome to hear. Yeah, you're giving me memories of like public API docs and then private API docs that only some people get access to, that you have to ask for when the public ones no longer work. And I think that actually dovetails nicely into the next question, which is sort of around access. So some large SaaS companies like Wix, as an example, allow partner developers to create an account with basically just an email address, and others require an application to even see the API docs, as you just mentioned. What factors do you think organizations should consider when thinking about how open they want to be to allow like self-serve access to APIs, SDKs, sandboxes, et cetera? I feel like I know, Kirby, where you're gonna land, but I'm curious what everyone else thinks.
I would say this was a intense discussion at Adobe, depending on the team that you're talking to. And I think that it depended on the persona and their level of motivation. There were some cases where I think we could get away with introducing that friction. We didn't want to, but we could get away with introducing that friction because the motivation was so high. It was we must build this integration, as opposed to, we could, show me why it's worth it. And I think that really the piece that we landed on where we needed to be the most open and public was around documentation and making sure that we could capture and show the ROI on why you should work with our technology, the capabilities that we can bring, the outcome that we could bring, before needing to introduce that friction. And there's like an ongoing debate at Adobe. I don't think it is particularly a company that does it very well by modern day standards. But I think there's a lot of discussions that are happening there that are trying to change that, and kind of where we're landing on, can we get access to a sandbox with sample data publicly? And then if I want to bring in my own data, that's where we introduce friction. Like, where is that friction point acceptable and where is it not?
I think for me, for me, it would be largely around how far along on your journey as a platform business. And I mean, that platform business mindset, if you're a product company trying to move over to platform business, I think you're going to meet that friction because you'll have the product team worried that you're about to give the cookies from the house away completely for nothing. And I think there's some reasonable arguments on both sides of that. There's some core business activities that have to be protected. I'm always been in the ecosystem, so I'm a bit of a zealot when it comes to give it away, lower the bar, let everyone in, because actually if that's your core strategy, figure out why you want to gate it and then determine if that gating is actually adding value. Yeah, so I'm very much like, it's time to first call for me all the way, because actually then those people are the advocates that can determine the value of the relationship, and then you can figure out the friction points later.
Yeah, my perspective on this is that it's very much dependent on what your product is as a company and how the API platform strategy fits in with that business model, right? So For example, Twilio is all about, frictionless, time to hello, the first ring. And there have been other companies that did not really benefit from having a developer platform at all, right? It was an afterthought for those companies. And their core businesses lie with, their core software. Like for Intuit, it was QuickBooks and TurboTax. And developer platform was a kind of an afterthought. So I think it very much, the friction and the amount of friction that gets introduced, I think very much, I would say, depends on the motivation of the company itself. Of course, the users, our developers are probably motivated. Depending on their motivation, they can either bypass that friction or, but I think I would argue that the friction is probably on the company's side as well, right? Like, hey, we're not really going to benefit from giving away these APIs. So I'm going to make you log in and create an account and all of that before you're even able to look at our API docs.
Now, I would just add, if internally there are team members, like Richard said, like giving away the cookies, from the bakery, just put in the appropriate tooling to protect yourself. And so let people hit sandbox all day, but then when it comes to production, do what Courtney said, that's where you have to have the contract. And I got burned by this myself one time. I was talking to a friend who worked at a competitor, and he was like, hey, could you tell your team members to stop looking at our docs all the time? And I was like, what? He goes, yeah, we're just tracking the IP addresses from your company on our docs. And so if you're paranoid that like, oh, my competitors are going to come and steal all my stuff, just gate it, if you need to, on like, email addresses on signups, flag it like, oh, that's Courtney from Amplitude and her Gmail account. Let's remove her out. We know who she is. And it's like, oh my gosh. All of these other product managers over here looking at stuff via the IP address. So just be smart about what are you trying to solve or protect against.
I'll confess that I've been inside Intuit's docs for quite some time. So we've been there, but I think for me,
they know you're there.
Yeah, well, I mean, my name's, I'm not shy about using my Xero email address, but because I think you can only get so far anyway. And actually, it's a sign of respect. Like, it's very hard to emulate what other companies are doing because it actually costs so much to implement. And I think it was one of Intuit's founders even talked about the fact that there's antibodies within a company that resist becoming a platform business as well. So like copying someone's docs isn't actually going to be the problem you're getting over. And I kind of feel like common ground there and actually us elevating the UX of this as a whole is probably an industry change that needs to happen. The big one for me is around partner experience, because people do gate that and I can't see inside anyone else's partner experience. And so that's the next step for me, is to figure out how we open the dialogue like Christine has done today around platform experience and partner experiences.
Yeah, I think that's...
Go ahead, Courtney.
I was going to just add, I think that's especially important. So my experience prior to Amplitude, when I was at Adobe, I helped to build up the team that was focused in this space. There was no whole design team that was focused on the end-to-end workflows. I had been working on some extensibility stuff for a particular product at Adobe and saw this gap. And there were some embedded designers kind of working in their silos. But nobody was really looking at that holistic experience. And I think that goes back to what we've been talking about, is sometimes you need to build up organizational change as well in order to tackle this problem and look at it holistically the way that it really needs to be done in order to be successful. And depending on the size of company and depending on the company's priorities, you might be open, welcomed with open arms, and you might have some friction there to get through. I was lucky in that I think Adobe, the people that I was working with, recognized the needs in many ways. But I think there's always kind of that trade-off between how much are we focusing on this priority compared to other priorities.
Yeah, and Kirby, go ahead. I think you had a comment too.
Oh, I think someone had mentioned that, what if we give them access to these APIs, what kind of damage are they going to do? And that should be a smoking gun that you're doing everything wrong. Because the minute, all platforms pretty much today are all microservices. The APIs are already there. It's just more so the moment you decide to surface it and do what Richard said, where we're moving from product to platform, it became a product. Your API is a product. And so, if the damage is like, oh, what if they're going to take the system down? It's like, well, then you didn't think about rate limits. You didn't think about all of these things that are really important. And so, if someone mentions that, then they either don't understand APIs as a business or like ecosystems, or it's like a problem where it's like, okay, pause, call Courtney. We need to do some developer experience. We need to really think about, what is the UX of this API, as opposed to just like, hey, I emailed you some API keys and you can have access to our system.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Richard.
This whole conversation, I'm loving it. One thing I was thinking of was like, yeah, we feel that intently, Kirby, like that. I feel like there were concerns about, clearly we are a house of some very valuable data. And so obviously if we go free for all and everybody have access to our APIs, we're like, okay, what are we giving away here? And I was like, well, that's one problem. The other is like, what's actually happening on our systems? Do we know the true cost of these calls? And I imagine Twilio has this down to a T. You've started with that origin of what is the price of this transaction happening. And this feels very niche, but it's at the origin of when you start to think of becoming a platform business, and it allows you to evolve out to the edges, to the touch points, and have that really coherent, holistic view, and then that really coherent experience. And Christine, I realize this might be outside of the scope for your customers, but I think there isn't a right way for this. But whack-a-moling the whole solution means things are going to be a lot harder later. And I guarantee you there'll be a product team in the future who'll be like, God damn you, Richard. So yeah, I've been watching Notion, for instance, right now, and how they've gone to market with their API. And I think that's one to watch to see how they're doing it. I would presume their API first. If they're not, they must be very close to it. So shouts out to Notion.
I know we're getting a lot of good inspiration here. It's interesting. Like, I feel like the tech world is littered with the kind of secrets of prod outages because someone built an integration and nobody knows who it was really, and they have some sort of recursion. And I think we've all probably interacted with that at some point or another. I see you, Richard, just nodding your head. So. Cool.
I think the cost, I think the one thing I wanted to add is the cost of creating a platform and maintaining it at a high standard and supporting it is extremely high. And I think companies need to be deliberate about platformizing their products, right? It's not just, oh, like we have a product, let's just, open up the API docs. It has to be a deliberate, designed solution. I think that's where the distinction lies for me, in that how open you are with the APIs versus how closed you are depends on how you've decided to invest in your platform as a company.
I totally agree. And I think it's interesting too that, your users of a normal SaaS product are not like actively tinkering, like trying to push the boundaries, but developers at your partners may be doing that. So I think the sort of standard is a lot higher than like your kind of normal, average, non-technical, potentially B2B SaaS user. Sorry, go ahead, Courtney.
I was going to say to add to that, there's also a hidden like maintenance and review costs. So how are people using your APIs? What data are they collecting? In our cases, when they're building an integration that's going to go into one of our products, who is going to review all of those submissions? How do you keep that quality bar high? How do you ensure that there's nothing malicious going on, or that the end customer experience is going to be a good one in order to keep that ecosystem flywheel kind of going? Those are a lot of areas that require either like manpower or require you to create automated testing in order to do a lot of those things. It's a lot of like service design that I don't think like that you need to think about if you're going to enter kind of this world.
Yeah, so I'm going to plus one on Ashwini's as well. The hidden cost on storytelling. Like, so you need to have agency from your product marketing team or your marketing team to tell these stories and to help build out that use case. So there's an allocation there. And then a huge education component, because you're gonna be like, okay, what are we talking about? It's a whole new story, a whole new persona to storytell too. And then developer relations. And so if your firm, is like really evolved, like Xero has a lot of developer relations people, it's an area where they've invested. But if you're in that situation that Ashwini is talking about, where it's like, hey, we're gonna make this switch, somebody's answering questions. Somebody's like, hey, I got a 400 error. It's like, So that if you don't want to give up sprint points from your precious engineering time, then you need to figure out what that's going to be. And I will just plug, there's a tool called Mosif that I can't promote enough, just because I really love how it'll let you watch people through their API journey. And then when they're hitting errors, it'll tell you, and then you can kind of jump and swarm to help them. And so investment is also tooling. So you got to buy your gateway, buy a dev portal, buy your, your tracking, all your goodies.
Awesome. And I think that leads into another great question here, which we're sort of talking about. What is something commonly overlooked in partner developer UX that you would recommend organizations implementing, maybe when they're transitioning, like we're talking about, from being maybe a product to being a platform?
I'm going to jump on that one. For me, there's so many things I could say there, but I was making my notes. I was thinking the service design, just on Courtney's point, like I just think you overlook that, but if you step over that point, and you're going to be whack-a-moling, just to say that statement again, but you're just going to be ad hocing this whole thing, and it means you're just kind of responding and reactive to what outcome you're really after, rather than kind of figuring out, like, who are we after? And there isn't a right way, but if you do enough investigation and enough investment into your service design, at least you have the truest path for you for the immediate future, whether that's 2 to 3 years out. And I think you can't really understate the value of at least having a map in the journey and getting buy-in. And I think the service design is what does that, getting the stakeholders across the entire org in on that, so that actually they understand why you're investing in infra that's actually tracking calls, or Mosif, for instance. And then you can make all those decisions around build or buy. Yes, that would be my read on that one.
I would say, I mean, this is probably a little bit futuristic, but one of the things that really irks me about the platform space is the fact that developers, our partner developers, are essentially, writing a browser, the equivalent of a browser, every time they have to integrate with an API. So I actually think like API standardization across platforms is probably the thing that I would change about the UX or the user experience of using APIs, right? Every company decides that they want to write their own API, do their own modeling, data modeling, when there are standards for these things. And so some level of standardization of API design is what I would propose.
For me, I feel like the thing that's most often overlooked is that you know your product the best. And so when you know your product the best, and you're going through an exercise for all of your personas, there should be a minimum delightful product that you want to deliver. And so how that manifests with our teams is we're talking about power-ups. For every persona, there should be a power-up. And so what that means is that we provide the test data for engineering and QA. We provide the testing scenarios for QA so that they don't have to spend their time writing that, like our partner QA. And then even as down to, there's a product manager or designer that needs to storytell what SDK that we're giving them. And so giving them a Figma file that has all the things that they can change, just so that you're just making that easier for them. And so I think that I would just encourage teams to say, like, what would you want if you were integrating to this? Because you know your product the best.
Yeah, I also think like it's very trendy right now to build everything API first, and that in many ways is the right way to go. But not every API needs to be productized. And I think there's some cool technology out there that it's very quick to be like, we have this cool technology, we're going to productize this API. But what problems are you actually solving? And I think this goes back to the API is a tool to get a job done. What problems are you actually trying to solve, and what customers can you point to that are having those problems? Who is going to adopt those APIs? I think I've at least seen like a lot of excitement around, we've built this cool thing, we're going to go give it to everybody, without a really keen understanding on what are the problems that are getting solved and who would actually use this.
I think we have time for one more question from the audience, and it's kind of, again, along these same lines. So what are some effective ways to get internal buy-in and investment when leadership wants to offer a platform experience, but is not yet sold on investing in developer experience? Everyone's
That's a $1 billion question.
I'll just harp on my earlier point, storytelling. I think being able to tell the story, what problems are you solving for your customers? Who have you already talked to that you've got kind of that early adopter buy-in? What journey mapping have you done to be able to fully understand like the scope of work that's going to happen, and kind of the service design and the organizational changes to really showcase the complexity of the problem and the space that you're going into.
Adding to that, I think those are all really important things. But one of the things also that has helped us successfully pitch developer platforms to companies that weren't ready to take that on as a priority has been just the monetary value that developers bring into the company. I mean, it's hard to measure, but I've seen some creative ways of it being measured. One metric was a lifetime value of a customer for that company. Typically increases if they have like apps attached or if they have extensions built by developers. So that's one strategy to use. I've definitely used a lot of the qualitative data, but just putting it down in terms of money has, been the easiest way to sell it.
Yeah, it's, even after 10 or how many years at Xero, we still have that conversation. Especially as you grow, people want to know what that dollar amount. You're like, well, it's kind of beyond that. So one of the metrics we use is like we generate X percentage of all activity on Xero systems. So that sounds terrible. You're like, oh my God, what are they doing? But it's, we're 40% of all document creation on Xero. And so like, even though we are a team of 100, that's outsized performance. And so the language I've been using lately is borrowed from, I can't think of the author's name, but that externalized value creation. So essentially, we're based in New Zealand. We are very aware, especially after COVID, that we don't have access to talent as much as we did 3 years ago. So actually this notion of externalized value creation is imperative to our future growth, is in that we can now activate a community of people globally. If we do this well enough, who will create value for our shared customers, and we can lift those developers up. And then we also lift our core customers up at the same time. So that's the most common language I'm using at the moment to sell that.
Actually, Richard, could you expand on that a little bit? I'm curious, how would you define externalized value?
So Xero has, we'll say, 3,500 employees. And so there's a limit to the total bandwidth of value we can create for customers today, just pure mechanics. But actually, if we take a team and get them to focus on developer experience, like the question, and say, actually, now we've created a conduit where we can tap a global market of developers in the wild. And that's in thinking in terms of a specific developer, but then, ideally you'd grow those developers into app integration partners, and then we start a journey with them that they evolve into.
Thank you.
The piece that I would add is, if you're going to build agency, be practical. And so if you don't have an API, start with one job to be done, go find tools to help. So I just dropped some tools in the recommendation. And then it's like, you don't need to hire a developer relations person when you have no customers. And you don't need a bunch of fancy things whenever it's just one partner that you're integrating with. And so be practical, be intentional, like we talked about with journey mapping and things like that, but it's okay to be thinking in the realm of minimal viable product and like how you're going to grow that out and match that to real KPIs, so that the thing that you're asking for is just buy-in to come on a journey. And then this is what the journey looks like.